Master planning is the art of designing and planning a community, which basically includes the massing of the buildings. It includes the infrastructure, the roads, and the transportation network. It also includes open spaces, parks, recreational places, and everything that is included in a community. So it's all put together, a complete community. Master planning is important because if you don't master plan the future growth of any urban city, it's going to have a very organic and unplanned growth. And when that happens, infrastructure is not designed properly. There is no vision how the city would expand. It just kind of morphs out of nowhere and kind of grows into something that nobody knows what it will grow into. There's no proper zoning. There is no proper planning of open spaces. There's no proper planning for traffic, so you have a lot of traffic congestions. The roads are not wide enough, and sometimes it's a life and safety issues. There are places where in the world there have these unplanned sprawls that have grown outside major cities, mostly in third world countries. And you would find that if there's a fire truck would not be able to go there because they never left, or they never made a road wide enough for the fire truck to go there. And in the process, everything burns down and people lose a lot of money and their livelihoods and their homes. So it's very important for every government anywhere in the world to make sure that any development is properly planned, and that's when they need to engage people like me who do master planning and come up with a master plan, and based on that master plan then allow development so there won't be any chaos down the road. Master planning is usually done by architects and urban designers. To begin any master planning, we have to do what we call data collection. And data collection is basically understanding the site. So if I was given a site by a client, which was, let's say, 1,000 acres of land, so I would want a survey of the property, a topographical survey of the property, so I can understand. I would want to know where the mature vegetation is, where the lakes are, or if there are any lakes, where the mountains are, or hills are, where the hills are. So I would want to know everything about that site. And that would be data collection in terms of the site. Then I would want to know what are the main access roads coming to that site, what are the entry points, exit points, how is it connected to the big city, if there is a city next door, or if there's a highway, how is it connected? So the connectivity would be very important for me to know. I would also want to know how many people the developer wants to live here. I mean, if there is going to be is it going to be like a very low density master plan that we're developing, or a very high density master plan? So I would like to know those. So all this information is collected, it's analyzed, and we would also sometimes do 3D modeling of the site, and so we could understand it. And we would also do 3D modeling of any existing buildings that are on the site. So that would be number one step, data collection. Number two step is vision master plan. So once we've collected all the data from the site, we have collected all the information from the developers or from the community, we would then go and create a vision master plan. A vision master plan would be a master plan, but it's not fully deeply detailed. It is a vision, and it's a vision that we will give a shape. So a kind of a physical shape, even though it's not physical, We would make models, we would make 3D models, or we would make animations and videos and renderings or sketches and a lot of vignettes, and then we could come up with our vision, what we think. So we would do a presentation of vision master plan. And there would be, in the vision master plan, we would figure out where the housing will be, where the parks would be, where the roads will go, why. We would justify everything. Everything will be justified. It will be thought out. So it's not random. Nothing is random. And that was a vision master plan. Vision master plan is, I think, the most important step in developing a master plan. Step 3 would be to develop a final master plan. So once the vision master plan is done and people have accepted and signed off on the vision master plan, people who have a stake in this community, whether they're community leaders or whether they're government officials, once it's done, it's signed off, we would then go and develop a final master plan. A final master plan would be a computer drafted master plan. It would define roads, it would define road sections, sections through the sites. It would explain how the topography is working. It would also create plots on the site. So everything, the entire site will be divided into plots of land, and each plot of land will then be designated with what kind of density it will get, whether it's a FAR of 0.65 or FAR of 6.5. Makes a huge difference. It would also designate for each plot what kind of height of the building you're allowed, what kind of use of that building, whether it's a mixed use or residential. So each plot will have an address. There will be approvals, what you can do on that, some sort of a zoning. And then there will be a right of way for the roads, which will be clearly delineated. There will be parks and recreations. There will be sites, plots left for fire stations, hospitals, and things like that. So that's a final master plan. Governments have a major role to play in urban design and in master planning. Problem is that a lot of times the governments have no vision, or they have a leader who has no vision. And the areas that have been developed nicely, whether it's Dubai or downtown, like let's take an example of downtown Dubai. Downtown Dubai was master planned and developed by Imar under the guidance of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed. Now, Sheikh Mohammed has a vision. He knows how he wants to see his state, his country, how he wants to see the built environment. We may disagree with his vision or we may agree with his vision, but he has a vision. And then there are people, you go to cities like Delhi, India, or Karachi, Pakistan. The government over there has no vision. They have no idea. So they just sit there and they just let people plan in piecemeals and they put it together, but there is no greater vision of how they want to see their city 20 years from now, 30 years from now. What should it look like? They have no vision. And I think it's very important for governments to have a vision of what they want to create within their city. And Dubai is a perfect example of that. How they actually built that whole city in the last 20, 25 years. And it was all master planned by a lot of American firms and put it together. And I also did a master plan project in Dubai. If you look at the old European cities, whether it's Paris, London, or even New York, Chicago, they have a certain charm, a character to them about it. Like versus compared to new modern cities like newer, relatively newer city like Houston or Dallas, or they don't have that charm. And the reason is because in a lot of these old cities, when they designed these cities, they designed these road networks that kind of die into an area which becomes a place where you go. Whether it was a piazza, whether it was a public square, whether it was a space that is surrounded by buildings and has a park and it has a lake or something, a small paddle boat lake, or it has a skating rink like in New York City, you know. So you created a place within a built environment. And it was done deliberately. And then what happened is, as time passed by, we forgot about that. We kind of killed that. And a lot of reasons for that. Invention of automobile was one of that. So people weren't walking anymore, they were driving. Now you're building a road and you're passing these buildings at 50 miles an hour versus when you were walking, you were going at 4 miles an hour. So the whole interaction of human being to the built environment or to a place that was created, it just completely got distorted. And we had now a completely different environment which does not give importance to placemaking. So we learned that in 60s, 70s, and we said that was a mistake. And then we started doing master planning. And when we started doing, we actually started doing master planning. In the master plan, we said, let's just start making, again, focus on those basic elements like placemaking within a built environment. So now if you see the newer development that have come up, like Dubai, Marina in Dubai, Jumeirah Lake Towers in Dubai, or the downtown of Dubai, they have deliberately tried to create that place where people would congregate. They would be forced to come to that area, whether it's a fountain in the middle of a man-made lake surrounded by restaurants and music and dancing fountains and all this stuff. That gives it a sense of place, that creates that sense of place, and people can relate to it. It's also a place where you can go to. I mean, if you ever go to Italy, even today, you go to these little towns, everybody takes a nap. When they get up at like 5:30, 6 p.m., they dress up and they start walking out into these little piazzas and public squares where they meet their friends, smoke a cigarette, eat an ice cream, get a cup of coffee, socialize. It's very important to socialize for people. So as a master planner and an architect, we need to give people that place where they can socialize. Because at the end of the day, we work 8 hours a day, we sleep 8 hours a day, we spend a few hours with their family, but then we want to socialize. We want to go out somewhere, whether it's for movies or cinemas, or whether it's restaurants or just to hang around. That's important. And placemaking is a process that not many architects understand. There is, as a master planner, I have no control over the site for my project. So what happens is sometimes a developer would own 100 acres of land within a major city, and then we would have to master plan that, versus sometimes they tell me to master plan a university which is in the middle of nowhere and there's absolutely no context around it except the natural nature. And these are completely two different approaches or in two different projects. When you're designing a master plan within a city, you have to really understand that city. You have to understand the context of the city. You have to understand the infrastructure of that city. You have to understand the road network of that city, because you want to create a missing part of the city. It's like the whole city got developed, but this 20 acres of land never got developed. And now it's kind of a missing part of a puzzle. So when you put that in, it should feel like it was always part of this whole thing. So that's why it's important to understand everything around it. Versus when you design a master plan, like I'm working on a campus which is in Pakistan, which is in the middle of literally nowhere. I mean, it's far away from any urban environment. It's far away from any city or even any village. There is a major highway that goes close by, and there's a lake, and there's a small college which we're going to develop into a major campus. So the whole thing had to be master planned. So there really is no context in terms of built context, like an environment that we have to be truthful to or married to. So we can really do anything we want. So we have to create our own environment. So when you're master planning something like that, you may have to create density in certain areas to give the feel of an urban environment, or you may want to create a very rural environment depending on what the vision of the planners and the community is. So it's a lot more flexible. And then architecture wise also you're a lot more flexible, like architecture design. If you want to control the facades and control the architecture design, you have a lot more flexibility when you're working outside the major city. Versus when you're working in the city, you want it to be part of that city. You want it to be an integral part of that city. Very important. Visually, walking wise, driving wise, it should all feel that it was always here. And that's the major difference between designing in an urban environment versus a non-urban environment. One of the major issues and major problems in this world is majority of the people are migrating towards the cities, and cities are exploding because there's usually lack of housing, or if there is housing, that's very expensive housing. Most new immigrants cannot afford it. So what happens is there's this unplanned development that happens on the outskirts of these cities, which is generally outside the boundary of city government. And there is no planning there and no controls. So people just build whatever they want to build. And usually, I mean, if you go to countries like India, Pakistan, or anywhere in Africa, you will find a lot of these cities are relatively well planned, but as you drive outside the cities, it's like big slums, unplanned developments, buildings built on top of each other, and the roads are like very narrow roads, 10 feet wide, sometimes 12 feet wide roads. The entire infrastructure either doesn't exist at all, or if it is, it's completely inadequate. And it's a major problem. It's a major problem in these countries. So how do we control it? I think the first step that the government should do is put moratorium. They should stop these developments completely. And they should not allow anybody to build anything, hold it back, and then develop a master plan. Very simple. Designate the area where the city is expanding, develop a master plan for that area, build the infrastructure, major infrastructure like arterial roads, connector roads, sewage system underneath those roads, bring in the electric grid system, and then allow development, which is on some sort of a planned development, and then let people do what they want to do. But they can't do how they want to do it. They have to do it as part of this master plan. And I think that's the only way that governments in these countries can control these unplanned development. the projects are so huge when you do urban design and master planning that even the governments cannot finance it by themselves because the funds required are in billions of dollars. So it usually ends up becoming a partnership between private developers and the government. So government definitely has to create infrastructure, has to master plan the property, master plan the whole area, create plots, and then the plots will be bought by developers, private developers, who would develop them within the framework of what the government has decided as the master plan. So if government has decided on this plot, there will be a 23-story apartment building, that's what that plot will be built for. It can't be built for anything else. You can't build a 15-story building, it has to be 23, because we now use what we call form-based zoning. And when we do form-based zoning, we actually create structure or the massing of the buildings. And the massing of the building is important to create the character of the city, and it's tied to that. So if you change the massing of the building, the character of the city changes, which changes the vision that was created originally. So everything is predetermined. But there are private developers who should be given opportunity to make money. So a developer will only come if he can see that I can make money on this property for developing, and they will participate with you. So what governments have to do is they have to make partnership with these developers. And government will do the infrastructure, private developers will develop the buildings. But a lot of times what happens is governments do not leave enough money on the table for private developers to make. So if government sells them land so expensive, and the developer looks at that and he goes, if I develop it, I won't make any money. So he won't come. So then government has to say, okay, well, we have to reduce the price of the land. Then there's also cash flow. Like governments could say, I want 100% of the money for the land up front. And the developers say, that's too much money up front, I'm not going to develop it. I'd rather go somewhere else. Versus if the government says, hey, pay us 10% of the money, start your project. As your project develops and you're selling it, give us portion of that money. And so we both benefit from your cash flow of the people who end users who are going to, So that's the kind of structures. You got to come up with these financial models that works. And then there's also incentives, incentive-based policies. The governments have to make incentive-based policies. Like anybody who builds here will not be charged tax for next 10 years. So that's an incentive for somebody to build, and they make profit and they don't pay tax on it. Or we will give you a payment plan, or we will reduce the cost of land if you do a sustainable building. That's an incentive. Or we would let you build a building without any parking because it's right next to a metro station. So you'll save money, and that's an incentive, So incentives can be formed in a policy by the government, which then brings the developers in from all over the world. One more incentive could be if I, as a developer, bring in millions of dollars from a third country into your country to develop, I should have a right to repatriate that money in the same currency as well as the profit that I make out of it. And you won't charge me any taxes. So there's all these policy incentives. And this is what a perfect example really is Dubai. That's what Dubai did. They actually master planned communities. They didn't even create infrastructure. They started selling the paper lots. On the paper, they said, this is your plot. Where's the road? This is where the road's going to be built. And people started making incremental payments, very important. And as they made incremental payments, they started building their building. They started selling their apartments. People would pay them the money. They would take part of that money, give it to the landlord or the government. And the government will use that money to create infrastructure. And it's a win-win situation for everybody. So yes, government and public-private partnership is very important in master planning urban design.